The late afternoon sun, a benevolent, almost forgiving Lagos gold, spilled through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lekki mansion. It painted long, warm stripes across the polished marble floors and illuminated the scene within with an almost cinematic perfection. Today was not just any day. It was a carefully constructed monument, a gleaming testament to a decade of what the world, and indeed Amara herself, believed to be a fairy tale marriage. It was the 10th wedding anniversary of Amara and Chinedu, and their magnificent home buzzed with the joyful, chaotic energy of a celebration meticulously planned for months. Servants in crisp, white uniforms, almost invisible in their efficiency, moved with silent purpose, arranging towering bouquets of imported lilies and orchids that filled the air with their heady, sweet perfume. The rich, decadent aroma of roasting lamb and smoky, fragrant jollof rice drifted in from the bustling outdoor kitchen, mingling with the faint, salty breeze whispering in from the nearby lagoon. Everything was perfect, almost painfully perfect. You've probably seen parties like this in glossy magazines, where laughter echoes like music and champagne flows like a river. But you've never felt the suffocating, bone-deep silence that can hide behind the most beautiful, practiced smiles. You wouldn't survive the truth that lies beneath. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. It's a small way for us to connect our separate worlds. Now, let's step into the heart of the celebration, just hours before it all comes crashing down in a spectacular inferno of betrayal. Amara, at 35, was the living embodiment of a grace that seemed both innate and hard-won. She moved through the whirlwind of preparations with a calm, serene smile, her presence a soothing balm on the pre-party frenzy of the staff. She wore a simple silk boubou, its vibrant, royal blue complementing her warm, dark skin. Her beauty wasn't the sharp, demanding kind that startled a room into silence. It was a quiet, confident warmth that drew people in, a gentle gravity that made them feel seen, valued, and instantly at ease. She paused her inspection of the dining room setup to adjust a single, errant centerpiece, her fingers, long and elegant, brushing against a delicate, snow-white rose petal. 10 years, an entire decade with Chinedu. She closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, allowing a wave of profound, almost overwhelming gratitude to wash over her. She remembered their early days with a vivid, tender clarity: the struggle, the shared dreams whispered in the cramped, humid confines of their small, rented apartment in Surulere. Long before his architectural firm had exploded into the powerhouse it was today, he had been her rock, her champion. The man who saw the nascent queen in her when she only saw a determined but struggling girl. Now, they had everything this beautiful. Sprawling home, a thriving business that was the envy of their peers, the respect of Lagos high society, and a love that, to her, felt as solid and unshakable as the very foundations of the magnificent house she stood in. She was, by all accounts, the luckiest, most blessed woman in the world. Her thoughts, as they often did, drifted to her twin sister, Nkechi. She wished Nkechi were here already, to share in this quiet, pre-party moment of reflection. She longed for her sister to be by her side, to help her get ready as they used to do when they were inseparable girls, sharing secrets and impossible dreams in the small, cluttered bedroom of their childhood home. Their bond was something Amara cherished above all else, a connection so deep, so primal, it felt almost mystical, a secret language spoken in shared glances and unspoken thoughts. They weren't just sisters. They were two halves of the same soul. A truth made tangible by the one precious, irreplaceable heirloom their mother had left them. People always said they were as identical as two drops of water, but Amara knew the subtle, defining differences. Amara's eyes held the soft, steady glow of contentment. Nkechi's, while just as beautiful, always held a restless, unnamed fire, a flicker of ambition and yearning that Amara had never quite been able to understand. She had always dismissed it as Nkechi's fierce drive to succeed. She would soon learn how wrong she was. With a happy sigh, Amara walked up the sweeping marble staircase to her bedroom, a vast, serene sanctuary of cream, gold, and ivory. On her velvet jewelry box, catching the golden afternoon light, lay a delicate silver chain. It held half of a heart, intricately carved and embedded with a single, deep blue sapphire that seemed to hold a universe within its depths. It was her most precious possession. Their mother, her voice a fragile whisper on her deathbed, had pressed the two halves into their young hands. "Never let this heart be broken," she had pleaded, her eyes full of a mother's final, desperate love. "As long as you two are together, you are whole." Amara had worn her half every single day for the past 15 years. Nkechi was supposed to wear the other. She picked up her phone, a small, happy smile on her lips, and dialed her sister's number. She wanted Nkechi to be here, to stand beside her tonight, their two halves finally making one whole, a perfect, poignant symbol for a perfect anniversary. "Nkechi," she said warmly when her sister finally answered. "Are you on your way? The party is about to start, and I miss my other half." "Almost there. Ama?" Nkechi's voice came through, a little breathless, a little distant, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "The traffic on the Lekki-Epe Expressway is a complete nightmare. I'll be there as soon as I can, I promise." "Okay, darling. Just drive safe. And don't forget our promise. Wear the necklace tonight. It would mean the world to me." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation so slight that anyone else would have missed it. But Amara felt it. "Of course," Nkechi finally said, her voice sounding a little strained, a little too bright. "I wouldn't forget. How could I see you soon?" Amara hung up, a faint, unnameable unease prickling at the back of her mind. Nkechi had sounded off, but she quickly, determinedly dismissed it. It was probably just the stress of the party, the notorious, soul-crushing Lagos traffic. Tonight was about joy. Tonight was about celebrating a decade of unwavering love. Nothing, and no one, could possibly spoil it. She slipped her half of the sapphire heart around her neck, the cool, familiar metal, a comforting weight against her skin. She looked at her reflection in the grand, ornate mirror. She saw a happy, fulfilled woman. She saw a beloved wife. She saw a cherished sister. She saw a life of perfect, blissful harmony. She had absolutely no idea she was staring at the beautiful, fragile, sunlit calm right before the hurricane. The party blossomed as the evening deepened, the mansion and its manicured gardens transforming into a glittering, intoxicating oasis of Lagos high society. The air, once serene, was now alive, thrumming with the sophisticated rhythms of a live jazz band, and the light, bubbly sound of laughter that danced on the warm night air, business tycoons in crisp, white agbadas, their embroidery a testament to their status, talked deals and politics with senators in tailored suits, their voices a low, confident murmur, their wives adorned in a breathtaking array of diamonds and silk, moved through the crowd like exotic birds, exchanging polite, knowing smiles and air kisses, their eyes constantly scanning, assessing, cataloging. It was a perfect picture, a carefully curated and flawlessly executed exhibition of success, power, and happiness. And at the very center of this glittering universe stood Chinedu, in his element, the consummate host. He moved through the crowd with an easy, practiced charm that was both magnetic and disarming, his arm possessively, lovingly, and almost constantly wrapped around Amara's waist. He was the very portrait of a doting, successful husband celebrating a decade of unwavering love. "My queen," he would murmur, his lips brushing her ear, whenever he introduced her to a new, important business associate from Abuja or a visiting oil magnate from Port Harcourt. None of this, absolutely none of it, would be possible without this incredible woman by my side. And Amara, bathed in the warm, intoxicating glow of his public affection, would smile, her heart swelling with a pride so deep, so profound, it almost hurt. She felt cherished. The unshakable anchor of his glamorous, high-flying world. This was her life, the life she had dreamed of, the life she had built with the man she loved. Yet, as the night wore on, as more champagne was poured and the laughter grew louder, tiny, almost imperceptible cracks began to appear in the flawless, diamond-hard facade of her happiness. Amara, a woman with an intuition sharpened by a lifetime of loving the people around her with a fierce, unwavering intensity, started to notice things. Small, dissonant notes in the otherwise perfect symphony of the evening. It started with Chinedu's hand on her waist. It was there. It was firm, a constant, reassuring pressure, but it felt restless. His fingers, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, would tap a nervous, silent, almost frantic rhythm against the delicate silk of her gown, and his eyes, while they smiled at her with practiced adoration, would often flicker away for a split second, scanning the crowded garden, searching. But for what or for whom she initially, and desperately, dismissed it as the normal, understandable stress of a host, the anxiety of ensuring a large, important, and very expensive event went off without a single embarrassing hitch. He was a perfectionist, after all. That was one of the things she loved about him. Then Nkechi arrived, an hour late. Her entrance a whisper of elegant disruption in a room of practiced, almost military punctuality. She looked breathtaking, as she always did. Their identical faces, a constant source of fascination for strangers, served tonight only to highlight the subtle, jarring differences between them. While Amara's gown was a picture of serene, regal elegance, a soft, flowing river of champagne-colored silk. Nkechi's was a shade bolder, a fiery, unapologetic crimson, cut a little lower, hugging her form in a way that didn't just invite attention, but demanded it. But it was her eyes that truly set them apart. Amara's held the soft, steady glow of deep-seated contentment. Nkechi's, tonight, held a nervous, almost feverish brightness that seemed to burn a little too hot. and around her neck, the space where the other half of their mother's sapphire heart should have been, was starkly, shockingly bare. It was an absence that screamed louder than any jewel could have. "Nkechi, you finally made it," Amara exclaimed, her voice full of genuine relief as she pulled her sister into a warm, encompassing hug. The hug, however, was not fully returned. Nkechi's body felt stiff, tense, her arms barely encircling Amara's back before pulling away with a jerky, unnatural swiftness. "Sorry I'm late." Nkechi said, her smile a quick, bright flash that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The traffic from the island was just an absolute monster." She deliberately avoided Amara's gaze, her own eyes darting around the room, a nervous, kinetic energy radiating from her that felt completely out of place at the relaxed, elegant party. "You forgot the necklace," Amara said, her voice a soft, gentle note of disappointment as her own hand instinctively went to her neck, touching her half of the heart. Nkechi's hand flew to her own neck in a gesture of perfectly feigned, theatrical surprise. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. In my insane rush to get here, I completely and totally forgot. It's sitting right there on my dresser. I feel absolutely terrible." The apology was smooth, polished, perhaps a little too well rehearsed. "It's all right," Amara said, quickly pushing down the small, illogical pang of hurt that pricked at her heart. "What matters is that you're here now, that we're together." But as the sisters stood side by side, a perfect, mirrored image of beauty, Chinedu approached them, a tray of freshly poured champagne flutes in his hand. "Ah, the other, slightly more troublesome half of my beautiful wife," he said, his smile wide and charming as he greeted Nkechi. But the look that passed between them, just for a fraction of a second, a glance that lasted no longer than a heartbeat, was something else. It wasn't the warm, familial look one gives a beloved sister-in-law. It was a glance of shared secrets, of a silent, urgent, and almost desperate communication that Amara felt in the pit of her stomach, but couldn't begin to decipher. Chinedu quickly looked away, turning his full, dazzling attention back to Amara. But the moment had been lodged in her mind, a tiny, sharp, poisonous splinter of doubt. Later, as the band played a slow, impossibly romantic ballad, Chinedu led Amara to the center of the terrace for a dance. The crowd parted for them, their smiles a mixture of admiration and envy. He held her close, his body warm and familiar against hers, whispering the sweet nothings into her ear that she had loved for a decade. He told her she was the most beautiful woman in the room, in the world. He told her how the past 10 years had been the best, most meaningful years of his life. Amara wanted to melt into his words, to lose herself in the perfect, intoxicating fantasy he was weaving around them. But over his strong, familiar shoulder, she could see Nkechi standing alone by the marble balustrade, watching them. And the expression on her sister's face wasn't one of happiness for her twin. It was a complex, painful, and deeply unsettling mixture of raw envy, desperate longing, and something that looked terrifyingly like resentment. The perfect picture of her life was beginning to fray at the edges, revealing the dark, ugly, and unsettling threads that lay just beneath the beautiful, golden surface. Amara closed her eyes, holding her husband tighter, trying to dance away the cold, creeping, and monstrous suspicion that was beginning to coil itself around her happy, unsuspecting heart. The jazz music swelled, a smooth, seductive melody that wrapped around the elegantly dressed guests. But for Amara, it had become a discordant, mocking soundtrack to the growing and undeniable unease in her soul. She tried, with a desperation that was foreign to her, to dismiss the strange, almost electric current that seemed to arc between her husband and her sister whenever they were in the same vicinity. She told herself it was a product of her own imagination, a figment of a mind overstimulated by the champagne and the emotion of the evening. She forced a radiant smile, accepted compliments from guests on her beautiful home and her even more beautiful marriage, and flawlessly played the part of the happy, contented wife at the center of a perfect universe. But the splinter of doubt, once lodged deep in her heart, had begun to fester, spreading its poison through her veins. She felt it as a cold knot in her stomach, a tightness in her chest that made it difficult to breathe. It was a small, practical matter, really, that finally pushed her from the foggy shores of suspicion to the sharp, rocky coast of action. The head caterer, a portly, perpetually sweating man named Mr. Deal, approached her for the second time that evening, his face a mask of polite, professional worry, his hands wringing a small, pristine white cloth. "Madam Amara," he said in a low, apologetic whisper, his eyes darting around as if he were imparting a state secret. "My deepest apologies for bothering you again, but the final installment check for the event staff. Your husband, Chief Chinedu, he assured me he would sign it before the main course was served, but I cannot seem to find him, and my staff, they are getting a bit restless." "Oh, of course. Dele. It's absolutely no problem at all," Amara said, her perfect hostess smile snapping back into place like a shield. "I'm sure he just got caught up in a deep conversation. He's terrible with time when he's talking business. I'll go find him right now and get that sorted for you immediately." It was the perfect excuse, a legitimate reason to escape the suffocating politeness of the party, to find Chinedu, and perhaps, in a quiet moment alone with him, to finally, once and for all, silence the fearful, ugly whispers that had started in her own mind. She excused herself from a tedious conversation with the senator's wife about the trials of finding good help, and made her way back into the house. The cool, climate-controlled air of the mansion was a welcome, shocking relief from the humid, perfumed air of the garden party. She checked the study first, his favorite retreat, a masculine space of dark wood, leather, and the faint, pleasant smell of old books and Cuban cigars. It was empty. A half-finished glass of expensive single-malt whiskey sat on his mahogany desk, a small, amber puddle of abandonment. She then headed up the sweeping marble staircase, the soft swish of her silk gown the only sound, towards their master bedroom at the end of the long, art-filled corridor. She assumed, and hoped, he had simply gone up to freshen up, to escape the demands of the party for a moment. The upstairs corridor was preternaturally quiet, a stark, jarring contrast to the vibrant, joyful energy of the celebration below. The heavy, ornate doors to the various rooms were closed, silent, imposing sentinels guarding the family's private life. As she walked towards their bedroom at the end of the hall, her silk slippers making no sound on the thick Persian rug, she noticed it a thin, almost invisible sliver of warm, yellow light escaping from under the door of the main guest room, the one they kept immaculately prepared for important overnight visitors. And then she heard them. The voices. At first, it was just a low, indistinct murmur, muffled by the heavy, soundproofed wood of the door. But as she drew closer, her hand instinctively going to her throat, her heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy, ominous drum against her ribs. The voices became clearer, sharper, and terrifyingly familiar. One was Chinedu's, his familiar, smooth, confident baritone. The other was female, and it was a voice she knew as well as her own, a voice that was a mirror of her own. It was the voice of her other half. It was Nkechi, a cold, paralyzing dread, so intense it was almost a physical force, washed over her. She stopped dead in the corridor, her hand hovering over the doorknob, her breath catching painfully in her throat. She shouldn't listen. This was a private conversation. It was probably nothing. A simple, innocent chat between a man and his sister-in-law. But the memory of that strange, charged, almost desperate look they had shared earlier, of Nkechi's tense, brittle demeanor, of Chinedu's restless, searching eyes, all coalesced into an undeniable, sickening certainty. She had to know. She pressed her ear gently, cautiously, against the cool, unforgiving wood of the door, her entire body trembling with a mixture of fear and a terrible, self-destructive need for the truth. "Can't keep doing this. Chinedu!" Nkechi's voice was a strained, ragged whisper, laced with a raw desperation that Amara had never heard from her confident, vibrant sister before. "Tonight, seeing you with her, all smiles, touching her, calling her your queen, it's killing me. It's physically killing me. Shh, baby, you need to calm down." Chinedu's voice was a low, soothing murmur, the same intimate, calming voice he used with Amara when she was upset or worried. The casual, thoughtless endearment. "Baby," was not a splinter. It was a physical blow, a punch to her gut that left her breathless. "It's just for a little while longer. We're so close. You know the plan." "What plan?" Nkechi's voice rose slightly, a frantic note of hysteria creeping in. "The plan where I have to stand there and watch my own sister, my twin, live the life that should have been mine. The plan where I have to smile and clap at her 10th anniversary party while you're sleeping in my bed a few nights a week." Amara felt the air being violently sucked from her lungs. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob, a scream, a sound of pure agony that threatened to rip through her. Sleeping in her bed, a few nights a week. The words were nonsensical. Impossible. Her beautifully ordered world was tilting violently, sickeningly on its axis. "It won't be like this forever, I promise you," Chinedu was saying, his voice the smooth, practiced purr of a seasoned liar. "I told you, Amara she's useful. Her family's company, Oak Industries, just secured that big government contract for the port expansion. Her name opens doors that mine. For now, can't. Once I leverage her connections to finalize the new Echo Atlantic real estate development, we'll be set. We'll be untouchable. Then I'll handle the divorce. I'll tell her it's not working, that we've grown apart. She's soft. Nkechi, she's always been soft. She'll cry, but she'll let go eventually. She's not soft." Nkechi spat, her voice now filled with a venomous, ancient jealousy that was terrifying in its intensity. "She's lucky. She's always been the lucky one. Everyone always loved her more. Even Mama, God rest her soul. She got you. She got the perfect life. And what did I get to be the shadow? The second best twin. The afterthought. "You have me," Chinedu said, his voice dropping to a seductive, hypnotic purr. "You have all of me, the real me. Amara just has the public version, the business arrangement, the performance. You know I've never loved her, not like I love you." The lie was so profound, so audacious, so complete, it was almost a work of art. Amara felt a strange, cold clarity descend upon her, a chilling calm that pushed the white-hot agony into a separate chamber of her heart. She had been living in a beautifully constructed, impeccably decorated lie for 10 years. Her perfect marriage, her loving husband, her devoted sister. It was all a sham, a performance, a business arrangement. She stumbled back from the door. The whispered, poisonous words from within the room now a deafening, echoing roar in her ears. She needed to see. She needed the final, brutal, visual confirmation. Her hand, now impossibly, terrifyingly steady, reached for the doorknob. The heavy, ornate brass doorknob felt impossibly cold in Amara's trembling hand, a stark, metallic contrast to the fire raging in her veins. For a single, eternal, heart-stopping second, she hesitated. A fragile, dying part of her, the hopeful, trusting woman she had been just 10 minutes ago, screamed at her to turn away, to run back down the grand staircase and pretend she had heard nothing at all. She could go back to the party, back to the beautiful, glittering lie, and perhaps, through sheer, desperate force of will, she could continue to live inside it for a little while longer. But the other part of her, the part that had just been violently shattered and instantly reforged in the crucible of absolute betrayal, knew that ignorance was a cage she could no longer, and would no longer, inhabit. She needed the truth. She needed to see it, to face it, to let its ugly, searing light burn away the last vestiges of her naivety. She needed the final, brutal confirmation. She turned the knob with an agonizing, deliberate slowness, the soft, well-oiled click of the latch sounding like a cannon blast in the preternatural silence of the corridor. The heavy, dark wood door swung inward without a sound, a silent, dark mouth opening to reveal the heart of her personal hell. The scene inside the guest room was a perfectly composed tableau of intimate betrayal, a living, breathing masterpiece of exquisite heartbreak. Chinedu stood with his back to the door, his hands resting possessively on Nkechi's waist, his thumbs drawing slow, lazy circles on the crimson fabric of her dress. Nkechi was facing him, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, her head tilted back as he leaned in to whisper something in her ear, his lips brushing against her skin. They were so engrossed in each other, so lost in their private, stolen, treacherous world, that they didn't hear the door open. They didn't feel the sudden, chilling shift in the air as Amara's presence filled the room like a cold, silent, and avenging judgment. Amara's eyes, now wide and unblinking, took in the scene, every single, poisonous detail burning itself into her memory with a cruel, photographic clarity. She saw the way her husband's fingers, the same fingers that had placed a wedding ring on her own hand, were now entangled in her sister's hair. She saw the smug, triumphant, almost feral smile on Nkechi's face as she listened to whatever sweet, venomous lie Chinedu was whispering. She saw the half-empty bottle of champagne on the bedside table, the same expensive vintage they were serving to their guests downstairs, 2 half-empty glasses beside it, a silent, mocking toast to their private, sordid celebration within her own anniversary celebration. But it was the final detail, the one that broke the last remaining, fragile thread of her composure, the one that made her vision swim and her heart feel as if it had not just stopped beating, but had been physically ripped from her chest, that she would never, ever forget. Around Nkechi's neck, gleaming with a malevolent, triumphant light under the soft, intimate glow of the bedside lamp, was the sapphire necklace. Not just her half, both halves, the two sacred, symbolic pieces of their late mother's heart, the ultimate, unbreakable symbol of their inseparable, eternal bond, were clicked together, forming a perfect, whole, and utterly desecrated heart, and it was resting on the chest of her betrayer. The symbolism was so brutal, so exquisitely, sadistically cruel. It was breathtaking. Nkechi wasn't just stealing her husband, she was stealing her identity, her history, her sacred connection to their mother, her very soul. She was wearing their shared past as a trophy of her conquest. She was declaring, in the most vicious way possible, that she was the whole one, the complete one, the victorious one, and that Amara was nothing but a discarded, forgotten, broken half. A sound, a small, strangled, almost inhuman gasp, escaped Amara's lips. It was enough. It was everything. Chinedu froze mid-whisper, his entire body going rigid with the sudden, shocking realization that they were not alone. Nkechi's eyes flew open, wide with passion 1 second, and then wider still with a dawning, animalistic terror the next. Slowly, as if moving through thick, heavy water in a nightmare, they both turned their heads towards the open door. The moment their eyes met Amara's, the beautifully constructed world they all inhabited shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Nkechi's face, moments ago flushed with secret, illicit passion, drained of all color, leaving behind a stark, ugly mask of pure, unadulterated fear. She looked like a child caught in a monstrous, unforgivable, and unforgivable act. She looked, for the first time, truly evil. Chinedu's reaction was different, and in its own way, far more damning. He didn't look guilty. He looked, annoyed. A flash of sheer, unadulterated irritation crossed his handsome, chiseled face, the look of a master architect whose carefully laid, intricate plans had just been inconveniently, infuriatingly disrupted. He dropped his hands from Nkechi's waist as if her skin had suddenly turned to fire and took a clumsy step back. His mind, the brilliant, calculating mind of a man who builds structures, was already, automatically, trying to find a way to rebuild the lie that had just collapsed around him. "Amara," he began, his voice a low, strained, and utterly unconvincing attempt at calmness. "This isn't, baby. It's not what it looks like. We were just talking." But Amara wasn't listening to his pathetic, insulting words. She was staring at the necklace. Her eyes, wide and dry, were fixed on the deep, celestial blue of the sapphires, the same color as her mother's favorite wrapper, the same color as the ink on their birth certificates that had once, a lifetime ago, declared them twins. two inseparable souls, born from the same womb. Nkechi's hands flew to her neck in a panicked, guilty reflex, her fingers fumbling to unclasp the necklace, to hide the damning evidence, but it was far, far too late. The heart, now chillingly whole, had already delivered its silent, brutal verdict. Amara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't rush forward to claw at their faces. The pain inside her was too vast, too cosmic, too deep for such simple human expressions. It was a silent, internal implosion, a complete and total collapse of her entire universe. She simply stood there in the doorway, her beautiful, regal face a blank, unreadable, and terrifyingly calm canvas. Her eyes, once so full of a warm, trusting love, were now empty, hollowed out by a betrayal so profound it had extinguished the very light within them. She looked at her husband, the man she had loved and supported for a decade, and then she looked at her twin sister, the other half of her soul, and in their panicked, guilty, and suddenly pathetic faces, she saw only strangers, monsters. Monsters wearing the beloved faces of the two people she had loved most in the entire world. Without another word, without another sound, she took a single, deliberate step backward, pulling the door slowly, silently shut, leaving them trapped in the room with their sordid, ugly, and now exposed truth. The soft, final click of the closing door was the sound of a life, a marriage, and a sisterhood ending forever. Amara stood in the silent, dimly lit upstairs corridor, her back pressed hard against the cold, unforgiving wood of the guest room door. The door itself seemed to vibrate with the panicked, muffled sounds of the chaos erupting within Chinedu's urgent, frantic hisses, Nkechi's choked, hysterical sobs. But to Amara, it was all a distant, meaningless noise. Her own world, her internal landscape, had gone completely, profoundly silent. The vibrant, joyful sounds of the party still drifting up from the gardens below. The smooth, seductive melody of the jazz band, the polite, tinkling laughter of the guests felt like they were coming from a different planet, a different, forgotten lifetime. She had braced herself for a tidal wave of emotion, an uncontrollable tsunami of feeling she expected screaming, soul-shattering rage. She expected gut-wrenching, body-racking sobs. She expected a violent, primal, physical need to break something, to shatter the beautiful, deceitful objects that filled her beautiful, deceitful home. But instead, there was nothing. Just a vast, cold, and terrifyingly calm emptiness. It was the preternatural calm at the very eye of a hurricane, a place where the destruction is so absolute, so complete, that all that remains is a profound, unnerving, and dangerous stillness. The woman who had walked up these stairs just 10 minutes ago, the happy, trusting, beloved wife named Amara, was gone. She had died in that doorway. In her place stood someone else, a stranger to herself, a woman carved from the iciest shards of heartbreak and a terrible, electrifying, newfound clarity. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the air feeling foreign and thin in her lungs. Then another, her hands, which had been trembling so violently she thought her bones might break, were now perfectly, unnaturally steady. Her mind, once a warm, sunlit garden of love and happy memories, was now a cold, crystalline, and perfectly ordered structure of singular purpose. She would not fall apart, She would not run away. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears or the drama of her rage. They had expected a messy, hysterical, emotional scene. They had expected her to crumble. They had, for 10 long years, completely and utterly underestimated her. They had mistaken her deep kindness for weakness, her unwavering trust for naivety. That was their first and most critical mistake. It would also be their last. She turned away from the door, her movements no longer the graceful, fluid motions of a happy woman, but the precise, economical movements of a predator. She walked to the master bedroom, her sanctuary, which now felt like a beautifully decorated, sun-drenched crime scene. She stood in front of the ornate, full-length, gold-leafed mirror and looked at her reflection with a cold, detached curiosity. The woman staring back at her was still beautiful, her makeup flawless, her champagne-colored silk gown shimmering under the soft, recessed lights. But her eyes were entirely different. The gentle warmth was gone, extinguished, replaced by a hard, brilliant, and dangerous fire. They were the eyes of a queen who had just discovered a treacherous coup in her court and was now calmly, methodically, and ruthlessly planning the public execution of the traitors. She didn't storm back downstairs in a flurry of righteous anger. She took her time. With a steady hand, she opened a drawer in her vanity and took out her lipstick, a bold, defiant crimson she rarely wore. She carefully, precisely, reapplied it, her lips forming a perfect, sharp, and unforgiving bow. She adjusted the single, broken half of her sapphire heart, letting it rest against her collarbone, not as a symbol of her loss, but as a declaration of her newfound independence. She was a half, yes, but she was a half that was about to prove she was stronger than their pathetic, deceitful whole. Then, she composed her face into a mask of serene, unbothered, almost beatific grace. A smile so radiant and so utterly empty of warmth, it was chilling. She was ready. She descended the sweeping marble staircase not like a wounded wife fleeing the scene of her own heartbreak, but like a monarch returning to her throne, ready to pass judgment. Her steps were even, measured, her head held high. No one, absolutely no one, would have guessed that her entire universe had just been systematically and brutally burned to the ground. The first person she encountered at the bottom of the stairs was a jovial family friend, an older woman who immediately grabbed her hand, her face beaming. "Amara, my dear, we were wondering where you had disappeared to. Your wonderful husband was just telling us all about your ambitious plans to open a children's charity foundation." Amara's smile didn't falter for a second. "Yes," she said, her voice impossibly smooth, light, and musical. "Chinedu has such a big, generous heart. He's always thinking of the less fortunate, always looking for ways to give back." The woman beamed, completely oblivious to the layers of venomous irony in Amara's words. A few moments later, Chinedu and Nkechi re-emerged from the house, their faces pale and strained, their eyes darting around the garden with the nervous energy of cornered animals. They had clearly concocted some kind of story, some way to manage the potential fallout of their discovery. They spotted Amara talking and laughing animatedly with a group of guests, and they froze. Utter, slack-jawed confusion on their faces. This was not the reaction they had prepared for. They had braced themselves for a public confrontation, a tearful, dramatic escape, the party ending in a maelstrom of scandal. They had not, in their wildest, most arrogant dreams, prepared for. This calm, smiling, impossibly radiant Amara, who was acting as if nothing at all had happened. Chinedu, his face a mask of forced composure, approached her cautiously, his own smile brittle and unconvincing. "Darling," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. "I was just looking for you. I was getting worried." Amara turned to him, her eyes sparkling with a brilliant, cold light that didn't reach her soul. "And I was just here, my love," she replied, her voice a silken purr as she took his arm, her touch both a caress and a capture. "Just enjoying our wonderful perfect party." She looked past his tense, frozen shoulder and smiled brightly at her sister, who was hovering nearby like a guilty ghost. "Nkechi, you look a little pale, darling. Are you feeling all right? The heat can be so overwhelming. Perhaps you need some water, or a stronger drink." Nkechi, completely thrown off balance, could only stammer a weak, pathetic, I'm fine. The psychological torture had begun, and Amara was proving to be a master of the art. She was not giving them the catharsis of a fight they expected. She was giving them something far, far worse, the agonizing, soul-crushing poison of uncertainty. They didn't know for sure that she knew. Or did they? Her behavior was so normal, so perfectly, terrifyingly composed, that they began to doubt their own senses. Had she really seen them? Had she truly heard everything, or had she just caught a fleeting glimpse of something innocent, and they were panicking over nothing? This uncertainty was a far more potent and effective poison than any angry accusation. It coiled in their stomachs, making their palms sweat, turning every polite smile from a guest into a potential threat. Amara led Chinedu back into the heart of the party, her grip on his arm light but as unyielding as a steel manacle. She was a master of performance, laughing at jokes, introducing her wonderful, supportive, and incredibly loyal husband to guests. And all the while, she could feel his terror, his abject confusion, radiating from him in palpable, delicious waves. She was no longer a participant in their pathetic, ugly lie. She was the director of their imminent and very public downfall. And she would let them squirm, let them dangle, let them suffocate in the grip of their own guilt, letting the tension in the air build to an unbearable breaking point, before she finally, at a time and place of her own choosing, decided to cut the thread and watch them fall. The warm night air, once filled with the sweet, intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine and the sophisticated, easy murmur of Lagos high society, now felt thick, heavy, and charged with an unspoken, electric tension. For Chinedu and Nkechi, every passing moment was a fresh wave of agony, a new chapter in a personalized, waking nightmare. Amara's performance was not just flawless, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a symphony of cruelty played with the lightest, most graceful touch. She was the perfect hostess, a vision of serene happiness, her smile never wavering, her laughter as light and effortless as the silk of her gown. She moved through the party like a phantom of her former self, a beautiful, graceful ghost haunting the scene of her own murder. She would occasionally catch Nkechi's eye across the crowded, glittering room and give a small, almost imperceptible, conspiratorial wink, as if they were sharing a secret, joyful joke. It was a gesture so intimate, so sisterly, that it sent shivers of pure, unadulterated terror down Nkechi's spine. To Chinedu, she was even more exquisitely, creatively cruel in her kindness. She would lean in, in full view of their admiring guests, to adjust his perfectly knotted tie, her fingers brushing his neck with a feather-light touch that felt like a brand. She would whisper, her warm breath against his ear. "You seem so tense tonight, my love. Is everything all right? You can tell me anything. You know that." The simple, loving question, loaded with a terrifying, unspoken double meaning, made his blood run cold. He was trapped, a panicked animal in a gilded cage of his own meticulous making, forced to play the part of the adoring, triumphant husband, while his heart hammered against his ribs in a frantic, desperate rhythm of pure, unadulterated fear. He had no idea what she knew, what she planned, and that suffocating ignorance was a far greater, far more intimate punishment than any screaming, plate-smashing match could ever be. Finally, the moment Amara had been patiently, predatorily waiting for arrived. The head caterer, with a flourish, gave the silent signal that the magnificent, 5-tiered anniversary cake, a monument of white icing and sugared flowers, was ready to be presented. The well-trained staff began to circulate with balletic grace, handing out fresh, chilled glasses of champagne to the unsuspecting guests. The jazz band quieted, and the master of ceremonies, a popular Lagos radio personality with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, stepped up to the small, beautifully decorated stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming with practiced enthusiasm through the state-of-the-art sound system. "May I have your attention, please? It is now time for the moment we have all been waiting for. A toast to our wonderful, inspiring couple, Amara and Chinedu, on 10 glorious years of a beautiful, inspiring, and truly blessed union." A wave of warm, genuine, and completely oblivious applause filled the garden. Guests turned their smiling, happy faces towards the small stage, where the cake stood like a towering, edible monument to a decade of carefully constructed lies. Chinedu, his face now a practiced, almost believable mask of profound happiness, took Amara's hand and led her towards the stage. Her hand felt impossibly cold and unnervingly steady in his. He squeezed it, desperately searching her face for any sign, any clue, any flicker of the emotion he knew must be raging within her. But her expression was one of serene, almost beatific, bridal joy. For a fleeting, hopeful, and utterly foolish moment, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had imagined the look in her eyes at the guest room door. Maybe she hadn't seen anything. Maybe, by some miracle, everything was going to be okay. He took the microphone from the MC, his confidence, his natural arrogance, slowly returning as he basked in the warm, admiring gaze of his peers. Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice smooth, resonant, and dripping with a hypocrisy so profound, it was almost admirable. 10 years, a full decade. They say that marriage is a journey, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I am the luckiest man in the world to have walked that journey with the most incredible, most beautiful, most supportive woman I have ever known." He turned to Amara, his eyes filled with a performance of adoration so convincing, so utterly perfect, it was chilling. "Amara, my love, you are my rock, my inspiration, my partner, my everything. You have given me a beautiful life, a peaceful home, and you have stood by me through thick and thin, through every success and every challenge, Every single good thing in my life, every achievement I have, is because of you. I love you more today than the day we first met." He leaned in and gave her a soft, lingering, and completely fraudulent kiss on the cheek. The crowd sighed, a collective, romantic sound of appreciation for this perfect display of love. Nkechi, standing in the front row like a beautiful, guilty statue, forced a tight, pained smile, clapping along with everyone else, her hands moving like a puppet's. Chinedu, now fully inhabiting his role as the perfect husband, wasn't finished. They also say that behind every successful man is a strong woman. But in my case, I have been doubly blessed, because I have two. He smiled warmly, almost gratefully, in Nkechi's direction. "My dear sister-in-law, Nkechi, you have been more than a sister to me. You have been a true friend, a confidant, a pillar of unwavering support for both of us. We are so grateful to have you in our lives." Nkechi's forced smile faltered, the public praise feeling like a hot poker being pressed against her guilty, racing conscience. Amara simply watched him, her own smile unwavering, a silent, patient predator observing its prey's final, foolish dance of arrogance. "So, I ask you all to raise your glasses high," Chinedu concluded, his voice ringing with a triumphant, oblivious finality. "To my wife, my love, my Amara, and to the next 10 years, which I know, in my heart, will be even more blessed and more beautiful than the last." "To Amara and Chinedu," the crowd echoed, their voices rising in a single, celebratory chorus. After the toast, Chinedu, beaming and completely unaware of the gaping abyss he was standing on the very edge of, turned to Amara with a look of utter, unsuspecting, almost idiotic love. He held the microphone out to her. "Now," he said, his voice full of warmth, "my darling wife would like to say a few words." The entire room fell silent, every eye, every phone camera, turning to her, waiting for the soft, gentle, coving words they all expected from the graceful, elegant, and now silently vengeful Mrs. Amara. Chinedu looked at her, his eyes shining with pride, completely unaware that he had just handed his executioner the ceremonial axe. This was it. This was the stage she had been so patiently setting all evening. This was her moment of reckoning. Amara accepted the microphone from Chinedu's outstretched hand. Her fingers brushed his in a gesture so light, so impossibly casual. It completely belied the monumental, life-altering act of war she was about to commit. She turned to face the sea of expectant, smiling faces, the raised champagne glasses, the glowing screens of 100 iPhones, all waiting for her to complete the perfect picture of marital bliss. The warm, flattering stage lights felt like a spotlight in an interrogation room, but inside, where it mattered, she was ice cold, a frozen river of purpose. She held the microphone for a moment, letting the silence stretch, letting it become heavy, building the anticipation to an almost unbearable point. She could see Nkechi in the front row, her fingers twisting the strap of her crimson clutch purse into a tight, tortured knot, her knuckles bone white. She could see Chinedu standing proudly beside her, his face a mask of indulgent, idiotic love. He truly, utterly had no idea. The fool, the beautiful, charming, and magnificent fool. "Thank you, my love," she began, her voice as sweet and smooth as Tupelo honey, her gaze fixed on Chinedu. The crowd relaxed, a collective, audible sigh of contentment rippling through the garden. They settled in, ready for a heartfelt, predictable, and ultimately boring anniversary speech. "And thank you all," she continued, her gaze now sweeping across the room. "Our dearest friends and family, for sharing this incredible, unforgettable milestone with us. 10 years. It feels like a lifetime, and yet it feels like only yesterday." She paused, letting her eyes linger on old friends, on powerful business partners, on the very people who formed the intricate, glittering fabric of their shared, public life. "Chinedu is right," she went on, her voice gaining a new, almost theatrical warmth. "He has blessed me with a beautiful life, a life so full of surprises." A few people in the front chuckled politely at her charming choice of words. Chinedu smiled, preening under what he perceived as her loving praise. "And to celebrate this incredible decade of love and all its wonderful surprises," she announced, her voice now ringing with a bright, infectious, and completely fraudulent excitement, "I find myself with a surprise of my own, a very special anniversary gift for my husband." The guests murmured with intrigue, their interest piqued. Chinedu looked at her, genuinely surprised now, a flicker of pleased curiosity in his eyes. "Actually," Amara corrected herself with a light, tinkling laugh that sounded chillingly genuine, "it's a gift for both my husband and my darling sister, Nkechi." Now, a confused, slightly awkward silence fell over the crowd. Nkechi's face, already pale, went rigid. "I've been thinking," Amara went on, her tone shifting, becoming more businesslike, more strategic. The voice of a woman discussing a corporate merger. "My family's company, Oak Industries, the company I inherited from my dear father, has been my sole responsibility for far too long. It is a heavy burden for one person to bear. And in honor of this momentous anniversary, I have decided to make a significant change. So, tonight, in front of all of you, my most trusted friends and advisors, I want to officially announce that I am transferring a 40% controlling stake in Oak Industries to my brilliant, deserving husband." Chinedu, gasps, sharp and audible, erupted around the room. This was not a gift. It was a seismic shift in the city's corporate landscape, a transfer of power and wealth on a scale that was staggering. Chinedu stared at her, his mouth literally falling open, his mind, for once, unable to process what was happening. 40%. That was an empire. That was everything he had been secretly, ruthlessly working towards. The guests, recovering from their shock, burst into stunned, impressed, almost reverent applause. "But wait, there's more," Amara said, holding up a perfectly manicured hand to quiet them. Her smile was blinding now, a weapon of mass destruction. "I also know that Chinedu cannot possibly handle such a great responsibility alone. He will need a trusted, loyal partner, someone who understands him intimately." She turned her radiant, unforgiving gaze directly onto her sister. "And that is why I am also gifting a 10% stake to my beloved twin, Nkechi, so that she may become his official business partner. I trust that with their unique closeness, their special bond, and their profound understanding of each other, they will lead the company to unprecedented new heights." The room was now in a state of confused, delirious ecstasy. This was a soap opera playing out in real life. Chinedu and Nkechi were frozen, their faces a grotesque, comical mixture of naked greed, profound shock, and sheer, abject terror. They had been handed the entire kingdom on a silver platter, and they knew, with a sickening certainty, that it was a trap. However, Amara's voice suddenly dropped. The warmth, the excitement, the joy, it all vanished, replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp coldness that sliced through the warm night air. This generous gift, this entire transfer of my father's legacy and fortune, comes with one small, non-negotiable condition. She paused, her timing impeccable, letting the silence become heavy, suffocating, unbearable. It is only valid if this 10-year marriage has been built on the sacred foundation of trust, fidelity, and honor that everyone here tonight is so beautifully celebrating. She let that single, devastating sentence hang in the air for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate turn, she faced her sister. "Nkechi, my dear, Chinedu told me he gave you a very special, very personal gift last night to celebrate our anniversary with you, a little token of his family affection. Won't you show everyone the beautiful necklace he gave you? All eyes to me, 100 pairs of them, swiveled to Nkechi." She instinctively clutched her neck, her face ashen, her eyes wide with the frantic terror of a cornered animal. The complete two-halved sapphire heart, the ultimate symbol of her treachery, was hidden just beneath the collar of her crimson dress. "Show them," Amara commanded, her voice no longer a whisper, but a royal decree, trembling, her body shaking uncontrollably. Nkechi could only shake her head, hot tears of shame and fear finally spilling down her cheeks. "No. Very well then," Amara said smoothly, turning back to the horrified crowd. "Perhaps this will help you all understand the nature of their new business partnership." And with that, she lifted her phone, which had been silently connected to the main sound system all along. She pressed play. The sound that filled the room was not music. It was Chinedu's voice, amplified, damning, and utterly inescapable. "She's soft, Nkechi. She'll cry, but she'll let go." It was followed by Nkechi's venomous, jealous reply. "She's always been the lucky one. She got the perfect life. And then, the most damning, most humiliating sound of all the unmistakable. Intimate, sordid sounds of their secret, treacherous encounter." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, a profound void of shock and collective horror. Then, Amara spoke one last time, her voice impossibly calm and clear. "The gifts, of course, are withdrawn. My marriage is my asset, and I am liquidating it. The party is over." The aftermath was not a storm. It was a silent, devastating implosion. The beautiful, glittering world that Amara and Chinedu had so meticulously constructed together, a world built on her family's legacy and his ambition, collapsed in on itself in a matter of seconds, leaving behind only the smoking, ugly ruins of reputation and the cold, bitter ashes of a decade-long lie. The profound, horrified silence that followed Amara's final, devastating pronouncement was broken by a single, sharp, and shockingly loud sound, a champagne flute dropped from a nerveless hand, shattering on the pristine marble floor. It was as if a spell had been broken. The stunned, collective paralysis of the guests gave way to a chaotic, almost frantic symphony of gasps, horrified whispers, and the rustle of expensive fabrics as people friends, family, business partners instinctively recoiled from the blast zone of the scandal. They scrambled for their phones, their fingers flying across screens, desperate to be the first to break the news, to share the delicious, ruinous gossip. The fairy tale was over, and the feeding frenzy had begun. Chinedu stood on the stage, a hollowed-out statue of a man, his face a grotesque, frozen mask of disbelief and ruin. The microphone, which he had held with such arrogant, self-assured confidence just moments before slipped from his numb, useless fingers and clattered to the floor. It let out a piercing, high-pitched screech of feedback that seemed to echo the silent, agonized scream trapped in his own throat. He looked out at the sea of faces, faces that had, just minutes ago, been looking at him with admiration and envy. Now, he saw only a uniform expression of pity, contempt, and a certain cold, clinical curiosity. His empire, built so carefully on the strong, respectable foundation of her family's name and the mortar of his own smooth, calculated deceit, had not just cracked. It had been utterly, publicly, and irrevocably demolished. Nkechi was in a worse state, a spectacle of pure, unraveling despair. She let out a single, animalistic sob, a sound of such raw, primal agony that several guests physically flinched. She tried to flee, to run, to disappear into the night, but there was nowhere to run. She was trapped, surrounded by a suffocating, silent wall of accusing eyes. She stumbled, her impossibly high designer heels catching on the soft astroturf of the garden, and fell to her knees, a crumpled, pathetic heap of shame and expensive crimson fabric. She remained there, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with violent, silent sobs. But Amara was no longer looking at them. Her work was done. Her judgment had been delivered, with a calmness that was both terrifying and magnificent in its finality. She turned, not to her shell-shocked husband or her sobbing sister, but to the magnificent, 5-tiered anniversary cake. She picked up the ceremonial silver knife, its handle heavy and cool in her hand, and with a single, clean, deliberate, and almost violent motion, she sliced it perfectly in half. The act was symbolic, a final visceral severing of their union, a clean cut through a decade of rot. She then placed the knife down gently, turned to the stunned, open-mouthed band leader, and said, her voice clear and audible in the sudden, electric hush, "Please, play something, a celebration, for a new beginning." Then, without a single look back at the wreckage she had wrought, she walked off the stage, her steps even and unhurried. She moved through the parting sea of guests, who stared at her with a mixture of awe and fear, and disappeared back into the mansion, her posture as straight and regal as a queen leaving a battlefield she had just, against all odds, definitively won. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and explosive media fallout. The story was everywhere, the most salacious, most talked-about scandal to hit Lagos high society in years. Chinedu became a pariah, the real estate development deal, the one he was banking his entire future on, collapsed overnight as his primary investors, unwilling to be associated with his tainted name, pulled out. His prestigious architectural firm lost its most valuable clients, who quietly and quickly terminated their contracts. He was asked to resign, politely but firmly, from the boards of 2 major corporations. His social life evaporated. He had tried to reach Amara. Of course, dozens of desperate, pleading calls that went straight to voicemail, hundreds of frantic texts that were left unread. Long, rambling, self-pitying emails filled with pathetic excuses and hollow apologies. She never responded. She had her lawyers handle everything. The divorce was swift, efficient, and brutal. He lost the house, as it had always been in her family's name. He lost access to her family's network. He had played for everything and ended up with nothing but the consequences of his own greed. Nkechi faced a quieter, but perhaps more profound. Exile. Her family ostracized her. Her friends, who had once envied her beauty and charm, now avoided her. Her betrayal too toxic to touch. She left Lagos, disappearing to some unknown city, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered at family gatherings. Months later, Amara stood in a place she never thought she would be, a place she had once gladly abdicated the CEO's office of her late father's company. After the dust had settled, she had realized that running away was not an option. This company, this legacy, was hers. She had the intelligence, the strength, the resilience to lead it. She had spent too long being a supportive wife. It was time to be a formidable boss. She sat in the large, leather chair behind the mahogany desk, the same chair she had once thought Chinedu would one day occupy. She looked out at the city skyline, not with the contentment of a wife, but with the sharp, focused vision of a leader. There was a soft knock on her door. "Come in." Nkechi stepped inside. She looked older, thinner, the feverish brightness in her eyes replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. She stood hesitantly by the door, no longer the confident, seductive woman from the party, but a broken, contrite shadow. "I came to say I'm sorry." "Amara," she whispered, the words sounding foreign and difficult in her mouth. "I know it doesn't change anything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I needed to say it." Amara looked at her sister, her twin, her other half, for a long, silent moment. The rage was gone. The ice had melted, leaving behind only a profound, aching sadness for what they had lost, for the bond that could never be fully repaired. "Forgiveness is a long journey, Nkechi," Amara said, her voice soft but firm. "I think you need to start by learning to forgive yourself first." She didn't offer a hug. She didn't promise that things would ever be the same. But in not turning her away, in offering that small, difficult sliver of grace, she opened a tiny, fragile door for a future where healing, at least, was possible. After Nkechi left, Amara picked up the single half of the sapphire heart that now sat on her desk as a paperweight. She held it in her palm, its edges sharp against her skin. She didn't try to find the other half. Nkechi had left it behind, but Amara had no interest in it. She didn't need to be made whole by anyone else. She was complete on her own. She put the silver chain back on, letting the broken heart rest against her chest. It was a scar, a reminder, but it was also a symbol of her own. Hard-won strength, a testament to the fact that even a heart broken in half could still beat strong, proud, and free. As she turned back to the window, looking out at the endless possibilities of the city below, she wasn't looking for a new love. She had finally, after a decade of suffocating deception, found herself. And she was more than enough.